Namaste and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's foreign policy, India's global outlook, how India engages with important countries around the world and builds webs of trust and partnership which benefit both sides. Viewers, normally we take up one country at a time and how India interacts with that country. But you would have noticed that when we talk about bilateral relations, it also has a broader impact on the region where that country exists. So, in this episode, we are going to take up the theme of India's regional diplomacy. Why does India engage with whole regions or whole sub-regions, groups of countries in blocks? And what does this tell us about the evolving nature of Indian foreign policy, our strategy toward different parts of the world, and how India is becoming a bigger player on the world stage in different regions of the world. So, to take you through this very special episode, I have with you very distinguished former Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar. Ambassador Sajanhar has been India's ambassador to Kazakhstan and Sweden and served in very important positions in the Ministry of External Affairs in a long career. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for joining me on this show.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Ambassador, when we talk of regional diplomacy, India engages with the 27 members of the European Union, all 54 members of the African Union, 10 members of the ASEAN group, 5 countries of the Central Asia, 14 countries of the Pacific Island nations. When we look at the numbers, our counterparts across the table when we do these summit and this engagement, it's quite interesting. There's India on one side and there's a large group of countries on the other side. And it's only the big powers, I mean usually China and the US who also adopt these formats. So what do you think this tells us about Indian diplomacy, the way it's evolved, especially under Prime Minister Modi's leadership? We are emphasizing more of this, looking at a whole region or sub-region as a compact and then trying to deal with that whole region. What does this signify, you think, about our diplomacy and our foreign policy?
Thank you very much, first of all, Professor Cholia, for having me on your show. The question you have asked, I think it's a win-win proposition for both sides. Because as far as these countries are concerned, for instance, it is the ASEAN, for instance, it is the Central Asians, the Nordics, all of them really would like to engage with India. And I think this is because they find it of use, they find it of benefit. India as an economy is growing. It is a very significant economy. Currently, if we were to take in purchasing power parity terms, it's the third largest economy in the world. It is about more than $9.5 trillion, notwithstanding the impact of the pandemic, notwithstanding the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war, because we've also had, although the war is just about 2 months old, we've seen in terms of the energy prices rising, in terms of general inflation. It's not only in India, it's the whole world. But that notwithstanding, India is still growing at 7.4% GDP growth. Those are the latest figures. It is the fastest growing economy in the world. So all these countries who are looking, these are smaller countries, and we can sort of go to look at different regions. They want to engage with India strategically, also politically, globally. India has emerged as a very significant player, and so these countries would like to engage with us. For us also, it is a great benefit, it is of great advantage. Meaning, just to give you mentioned about ASEAN, you mentioned about Central Asia, you mentioned about the Nordics. Now, for instance, if I were to take the Nordics, because we've just had the India-Nordic Summit in Denmark and Copenhagen. The first summit of this nature took place with the Nordic countries, took place in 2018. When Prime Minister Modi went to Stockholm, to Sweden, for that summit, it was a visit by an Indian Prime Minister after 30 years. So the point I would like to make here is that at times there are all these many countries. It is not possible for the leader, particularly of a large country, growing importance, growing significance, growing relevance like India, for India to go, the leaders
to each and everyone.
Each and everyone. After all, there are 193 countries.
Right.
And we have seen what Prime Minister Modi has said, that there are no small countries, there are no big countries. All countries are equally significant. We have to reach out to all of them. So how do we do that? I think the only way really is that you can do it is by having these regional meetings, these regional gatherings at which both in terms of the issues that are being discussed, but also in terms of reaching out to the individual countries, it is very beneficial and it is very useful.
And generally, when Prime Minister goes for these regional summits, he also has one-on-ones with individual counterparts, presidents or prime ministers also. So, but Ambassador, it also seems to me that we have now our convening power, our ability to bring such large groups to pay attention to India and to want more from India, like you said, the market and slice of our economic pie. It seems like that convening power is also a sign of a rising stature, because presumably if a small or a medium country, much weaker than India, would want to have such a summit with, let's say, all 27 members of the European Union, they probably would not see the value of it. So, it does say a lot about our ability to attract larger number of countries to partner with us in big groups.
No, absolutely. I think the outreach of India has increased. The significance of India has increased. Just to give you these two examples, actually both of these you have mentioned. One is with the EU, with the European Union. We are all aware that a very new format was established last year when we had EU 27 plus 1.
Yeah.
That means the leaders of all the 27, normally when we have an India EU summit or any other country with EU, it is basically the leadership of the European Union.
Right.
That is the EU
Commission.
President, European Commission President,
Council.
Ursula von der Leyen, Charles Michel, Joseph Borrell, they will be there. But in this case, when we had this meeting in Porto last year, we had the 27 heads of government of all these 27 countries, they were present there. Now again, this sort of a format, the EU has adopted only with the United States because they consider it important enough, and now they consider India also to be significant. The second example I would like to give you is again of the Nordic summit that you had mentioned, that the first summit took place in 2018. Second, we had this now. When the first summit was held, many people thought that this might be just a one-shot affair. We might not be able to follow it through. But both sides, India as well as the Nordic countries, have found value. That is why, in fact, the second
edition.
The second edition of this was expected to take place, was scheduled to take place in June last year. But then we had the problem with the COVID. And here also, the Nordics have such a summit relationship only with the United States and with India. So what you mentioned very correctly is that these countries find great value because I think here we have, whether it is our values, democracy, pluralism, freedoms, etc., and interests, both of them coincide, both of them converge, and that is why we have these engagements.
Viewers, values and interest, Ambassador Sajanhar is just talking about them. I want you to look at a video clip of Prime Minister Modi addressing the counterparts, heads of government of all the Central Asian countries. India has now started a new format of India Central Asia Summit. There are 5 countries in it, and Prime Minister was addressing all of them. Let's hear it and continue the discussion.
एक्सेलेंसीज, क्षेत्रीय सुरक्षा के लिए हम सभी की चिंताएं और उद्देश्य एक समान है। अफगानिस्तान के घटनाक्रम से हम सभी चिंतित हैं। इस संदर्भ में भी हमारा आपसी सहयोग क्षेत्रीय सुरक्षा और स्थिरता के लिए और महत्वपूर्ण हो गया है। एक्सेलेंसीज, आज की समिट के 3 प्रमुख उद्देश्य हैं। पहला, यह स्पष्ट करना कि भारत और सेंट्रल एशिया का आपसी सहयोग क्षेत्रीय सुरक्षा और समृद्धि के लिए अनिवार्य है। भारत की तरफ से मैं यह स्पष्ट करना चाहूंगा कि सेंट्रल एशिया is central to India's vision of an integrated and stable extended neighborhood. दूसरा उद्देश्य हमारे सहयोग को एक प्रभावी स्ट्रक्चर देना है। इससे विभिन्न स्तरों पर और विभिन्न स्टेक होल्डर्स के बीच रेगुलर इंटरेक्शन का एक ढांचा स्थापित होगा और तीसरा उद्देश्य हमारे सहयोग के लिए एक महत्वाकांक्षी रोडमैप बनाना है। इसके माध्यम से हम अगले 3 सालों में रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी और कोऑपरेशन के लिए एक इंटीग्रेटेड अप्रोच अपना सकेंगे। एक्सेलेंसीज, मैं एक बार फिर इंडिया सेंट्रल एशिया शिखर सम्मेलन की प्रथम बैठक में आपका हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूं।
To regional connectivity and cooperation, this is what Prime Minister of India is telling his counterparts from Central Asia. Ambassador Sajanhar, you have been ambassador to Kazakhstan and you have seen India-Kazakhstan bilateral relations, but that region has a grouping, all these countries have a cooperative mechanism of their own, and clearly we are now trying to tap into that whole region. Prime Minister was talking about security and economy and a variety of factors where we want this integrated approach, not just a piecemeal approach of one-on-one. So your thoughts on how different this is from, let's just say, Indian Prime Minister and President of Kazakhstan meeting, as opposed to all 5 of them engaging in this fashion?
You know, one thing, Professor Chaulia, it is not an either-or situation because when the Prime Minister of India meets with all these 5 countries, as you mentioned yourself, he's also meeting them individually. So, you know, a lot of homework is done on that basis also. On a bilateral basis, what is the status of our relationship? What are the opportunities? What are the problems? What are the challenges? And they are taken care of. They are taken forward. And then there are certain issues. You know, for instance, here, what the Prime Minister mentioned very correctly was that after what has happened in Afghanistan on the 15th of August last year, you know, there is a whole new security architecture. And you would recall that we had invited all the 5 leaders to be the chief guest at our Republic Day, but it could not happen because of a variety of reasons and also because of the ongoing COVID. But still we were able to have this virtual summit that took place, and going forward, now it has been decided, as the Prime Minister mentioned, that we should have a framework for our cooperation. So whether it is dealing with the terrorism, whether it is dealing with the issue of Afghanistan, because you would recall it is already more than 8.5, 9 months that Taliban is supposed to have come to power in Kabul. There is not a single country in the world that has recognized it still. We have our own experience of UN Security Council Resolution 2593, which was adopted when India was chairing the Security Council last August, on the 30th of August. So how do we take that forward? And I think that is a discussion that has taken place. In addition, you would recall, Professor Chaulia, that just before that, we also had what is known as the India Central Asia Dialogue. That is our External Affairs Minister. He invited all the 5 Central Asian countries, their foreign ministers.
And our National Security Advisor also was hosting
on the 10th
Delhi
of November.
dialogue.
On the 10th of November, he invited. That, of course, group was slightly bigger because he had also invited the Russian and the Iranians there. It was not limited only to Central Asia, but he had invited those also. So the point here is that there are certain issues on which we need all of them to be there. One is terrorism, the other is connectivity, what the Prime Minister mentioned. And connectivity is also an area that, you know, if there is a road, as you know, we are talking about the International North-South Transport Corridor, or we are talking about working on Chabahar project, then there is Iran is also involved. You would have Turkmenistan, you have Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan says we want to construct a railway line and a road from Termez to Mazar-e-Sharif to Herat to Iran. So there, some way, the involvement of Afghanistan is also involved. Now, if you're talking about drugs, if you're talking about how to take care of that, if you're talking about money laundering, then all these countries really need to be together. The point I'm making here is that there are issues which are transboundary, for which you have to have other countries of the region. And in that sense, you know, having these regional partnerships and regional engagements, that is much more beneficial than having just a one-to-one, because then you have to approach the others also.
And Ambassador, it also seems like Indian position generally when we have partnerships like this with regions or sub-regions is to strengthen the internal unity among those countries. I mean, that's always been a key point, right? Because there are some big powers that try to divide these regional groupings and play one off against the other and interfere in their internal affairs. But Indian approach has always been that we recognize the centrality of this institution or this regional formation that you already have, and we will engage with you in a way affirming the centrality of that regional grouping and also strengthening their hand, right? Because that's always key, because our approach is not to make one fight against the other, but to have them all united, because I think it ultimately harks back to our vision of a multilateral diplomacy and also multipolar world order, right? So we want more regions to be stable and free of hegemonic play from outside. So in that sense, you think that there is a deeper strategic purpose in doing this kind of engagement?
No, absolutely. I think if you would recall, the first statement that the Prime Minister had made when he went to the UN General Assembly, he spoke about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. He spoke about the world is a family and how we want to engage with the whole world, on equal terms, on equal basis. And I think as far as these regional settings are concerned, these engagements are concerned, I think we always look at it as to what is it that we can bring to the table? What are our strengths? And I have spoken, of course, as far as our market is concerned, as our economy is concerned, but also in addition to that, when the Prime Minister was in Copenhagen recently, he was addressing the Indian community, and he was talking about, all the initiatives that India has taken and what are our aspirations. Yeah. So as far as our initiatives are concerned, whether it is the GST, whether it is Atmanirbhar Bharat, whether it is the productivity linked incentives, so we want to invite them to India, but also we want to share what we have been able to achieve, whether it is in the area of digitalization, whether it is in the area of Make in India,
financial inclusion, lots of governance reforms,
startups. So these are all areas where we can share our experience. And this is not only as far as Nordics are concerned. Now Nordics, they also have they are small countries, meaning it is $1.6 trillion is the total economy, GDP of these 5 countries.
These 5. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Iceland.
Yeah. These 5 countries. Their total GDP is $1.6 trillion, meaning if you would look at it, it's the GDP of more than the GDP of Russia.
Yeah.
But the population is just 27 million. But they have such niche technologies, whether it is in green technology, green energy, climate change, innovation. So these are all issues from which we can benefit. Blue economy.
So it's like economies of scale, because when we deal with the whole region or sub-region, you're looking at a bigger market and a bigger set of pooled, aggregated capabilities that we can tap into.
Absolutely. And they are, of course, meaning if they have these technologies, their markets themselves are rather small, that they cannot take benefit, they cannot take advantage. They have to go out. And today, I think there is, after what we have seen, how China was, weaponizing its supply chains after the pandemic, even for small little things like masks and ventilators and PPEs, etc. So the world has also realized that you need a trusted, you need a credible partner, you need a reliable partner. Reliability of supply chains has become very crucial, very critical. And in that context, India, very
so regional groupings matter for supply chains, because that's also a very important factor. Viewers, the thing is, India has been engaging with some of these groups and subgroups in different regions of the world for a while. And one of the most important grouping is the ASEAN countries, 10 countries in Southeast Asia. And I'd like you to listen into what Prime Minister Modi had to say to his counterparts from all the ASEAN countries at the most recent India-ASEAN summit, and then carry forward.
इतिहास गवाह है कि भारत और आसियान के बीच हजारों साल से जीवंत संबंध रहे हैं। इनकी झलक हमारे साझा मूल्य, परंपराएं, भाषाएं, ग्रंथ, वास्तुकला, संस्कृति, खान पान हर जगह पे दिखते हैं और इसलिए आसियान की यूनिटी और सेंट्रलिटी भारत के लिए सदैव एक महत्वपूर्ण प्राथमिकता रही है। आसियान की यह विशेष भूमिका भारत की एक्ट ईस्ट पॉलिसी, जो हमारी सिक्योरिटी एंड ग्रोथ फॉर ऑल इन द रीजन यानी सागर नीति में निहित है। भारत के इंडो पैसिफिक ओशन इनिशिएटिव और आसियान के आउटलुक फॉर द इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में हमारे साझा विजन और आपसी सहयोग का ढांचा है। योर मैजेस्टी, एक्सेलेंसी, वर्ष 2022 में हमारी पार्टनरशिप के 30 वर्ष पूरे होंगे। भारत भी अपनी आजादी के 75 वर्ष पूरे करेगा। मुझे बहुत हर्ष है कि इस महत्वपूर्ण पड़ाव को हम आसियान भारत मित्रता वर्ष के रूप में मनाएंगे। भारत आगामी अध्यक्ष कंबोडिया और हमारे कंट्री को कोऑर्डिनेटर सिंगापुर के साथ मिलकर आपसी संबंधों को और गहन बनाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। अब मैं आप सभी के विचार सुनने के लिए आतुर हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Prime Minister of India wants to hear the views of all his counterparts, and he has laid out our vision for ASEAN and ASEAN centrality, which is of course a big building block for our Act East policy and our Indo-Pacific strategy. Ambassador Sajinar, you have actually been involved in negotiations with ASEAN countries and with the EU on our on trade and economic matters. Now, I'd like you to share with the viewers how dealing with a group on, say, a free trade agreement or the preferential agreement. The one with ASEAN is one of the longest running ones. It's more than a decade. India-ASEAN free trade agreement is operational. So, you've been involved in this. How is it to negotiate with 10 countries at one time as opposed to one-on-one?
In one word, I would say challenging. In one word, difficult, because I have negotiated both as far as India-EU, when we started the BTIA, the Bilateral Trade and Investment Agreement in 2007, and then we thought that we would be able to do it within 2 years. But then we came up to 2013 and we were not going anywhere, so the negotiations were put to a stop, and they have resumed only this year when we had the meeting with last year, when we had the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and all. So now we are getting under three rubrics, goods, investment and geographical indications of origin. As far as East Asia is concerned, ASEAN is concerned particularly, we started the negotiations in 2001-2002, and then we were able to conclude that in 2009. And that really did give an impetus to our bilateral trade. I remember if it was about $12 billion in 2001, it had increased to about $72 billion by 2009-2010. But after that, we have not really seen much of a progress. So I think it is difficult, it is challenging. Some of the agreements, particularly as far as the FTA agreements are concerned, they have not yielded the desired results to us, and that is why you would see that in 2019 we had been negotiating very seriously, very sincerely in the RCEP, in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
ASEAN countries are part of it.
They are part of it. It's it was 10+6, all those who had signed this Treaty of Peace, Amity and Cooperation with the ASEAN. But India withdrew from that in 2019 for a variety of reasons. I don't think we can go into it now. But India has been looking at what it needs to do, how it can take its, which is a win-win situation. And that is why you would see that, the Act, the Look East policy, which was launched in 1992, but it had lost steam by about 2014. And that is why Prime Minister Modi, when he went to Myanmar, you would recall, for the East Asia Summit, at that time he announced the launch of the Act East policy. And here what we have is that in addition to just trade, investment, commerce, we also have security. We also have connectivity. And what Prime Minister Modi at that time had mentioned, that the success of the Act East policy will depend upon the benefits and advantages that this can bring to the northeastern states of India, because they are the ones which are
to ASEAN,
which are most closely connected. And that is why the connectivity from the northeastern states, the trilateral highway through Myanmar to Thailand and maybe onwards to Cambodia and Vietnam, that could also be taken. And again, there are new aspects in terms of digital connectivity. And when Prime Minister Modi, I think, had gone in 2018 to Kuala Lumpur for the East Asia Summit, he had also offered a $1 billion line of credit for promoting connectivity, physical as well as digital connectivity.
And Ambassador, we also engage with the Pacific Island countries. I mean, these are less developed than ASEAN countries. We also have a ongoing dialogue with the African Union as a whole, and these countries expect more assistance and support from India. So, and they often say that compared to the Chinese, India is not able to give them as much. So, how are we able to make ourselves relevant to these lesser developed countries in groupings, and when we engage with them?
Yeah, so first, you mentioned about the Pacific Island states, and that's a very important group of about 14 countries. And there also, you would remember that when Prime Minister Modi had traveled there, he was in Myanmar in 2014 November. From there, he went to Canberra. Again, his visit to Australia was after a gap of 32 years, from India, any Prime Minister. And then he went to Fiji from there.
Yeah.
And there also, the visit of an Indian Prime Minister was after 33 years. And what he did at that time was he got all the leaders of all the 14 countries and for interaction, because I think India's assistance and support has been considerable in these areas, but it really needs to be focused in these countries. And then to again send out the message that it's not a one-off thing that the Prime Minister has travelled. We invited all leaders of all the 14 countries to come to India in 2015.
Yes.
And they came here, and there was a big summit organized with all these leaders in Jaipur in 2015. So we are reaching out to all of them, and I think over the last few years we have seen much greater focus, both individually, bilaterally, as well as
with the whole region. And with Africa, Ambassador, we are short on time. With Africa
also, I think 2015, the first time that any country was able to get all the 54 leaders of all
not even the Chinese could do.
Not even the Chinese had done that before that. It's only after, I think, Chinese look at what India is doing and try to emulate it, because this is what we saw in the case of Central Asia. They had not done it. When they saw that India is doing it, they immediately sort of came in.
So viewers, India is setting the trend, setting the standards in regional diplomacy, because we believe in regionalism as a building block for stable international order. Without regions and having important groupings without regions, there would be no cooperation. Nothing called international cooperation really exists if there is no regional cooperation. So India is doing its utmost to help strengthen networks of regional cooperation, or trans-regional cooperation, if you would like to say. So these trans-boundary problems that Ambassador Sajanhar spoke about require regional consensus and interaction with all of them, and that's what we're trying to do across the world. So thank you, Ambassador Sajanhar, for enlightening the audience so much.
Thank you very much.
And viewers, keep thinking about new aspects and new dimensions of Indian foreign policy. I'll come back to you again with another episode of Indian Diplomacy soon. Until then, take care.